Alright guys, I just want to show you how it looks when it's leaking in the bell housing. You can see it's a fully sealed bell housing, so it's really tight on there and it may not just pour out of there. But it's going to be right here in the bottom, and you'll see a little bit of wetness like this. And it doesn't take much inside of there to coat that clutch and start a shudder issue. So you can see there's not too much, won't be dripping in the ground. It's one thing to look for. Alright, transmission is out, and you can see a lot better now what the issue is. Hopefully you can see it with the light here, the focus. There we go. You can see it starts getting pretty wet inside of there. Pulls up in the bottom. You can see it coming out, it's pretty wet right there. And then it just sprays it all around in there as you go down the road, and the frictions on the actual disc in here get wet, and that's causing your shudder. Now the first thing you gotta do is prop it up just like this, sitting upright, perfectly level. Make sure it's nice and solid, and then you're gonna need all these special tools just to fix it. Alright, so one of the first things you want to do is spin it and make sure there's no scraping noises, so we know there's no other issues. This one sounds perfectly fine. And then there's a snap ring right here. This big snap ring. Like so. You get that out of there. And then this center hub comes out with it. And then after that, there's a real thick snap ring right here. So the next thing you gotta do is press that snap ring down, which will push the actual inner bearing race of the actual clutch as part of the clutch. It'll push it down just enough so that snap ring's free, making you use the regular snap ring pliers to get it off very easy after that. So we're gonna put the special tool on there that fits in there just perfect. And then this monstrosity, and you just line it up to the holes here in the case, and then you just simply bolt it in so it holds it to the case, and we can press off the case then. 2 bolts on each side, and it doesn't take much. And this side requires bolts and nuts in the bottom. And you can literally just do these hand tight. And that way we can press off of it. Put our forcing screw in. Make sure it lines up. There's a little divot in the special tool, and it'll self-center itself. Make sure these are loose enough so it can self-center. And you just gotta turn it down just a bit, just like that. You heard it move? That's all you need to do. Any more than that, and the guys can actually start breaking the clutch tower in there. And then you simply use a snap ring pliers that has a bill design just like this, that spreads outwards. And now it should come out very easy. And then these are throwaways. And then you put these little legs in here. There's 3 of them, and this one's the offset one. And you make sure you use the offset for that one. And then you use this other forcing tool that's smaller, and that will go onto the center instead of the bearing of the actual clutch. And we'll push off the center stand of the input shaft and release the actual clutch from the input shaft. So it's got a little bearing in there that's pressed down there. That's part of the actual clutch. So it won't just lift out of here. So we got that, our 3 legs on there. And then this big plate just goes back on here. And use the adjustable slots here. And you put a nut on each one of them. And that'll attach the legs to the forcing plate. And then we'll simply turn the forcing screw again, and then we'll press it right off of there. You can see I'm doing it by hand basically, and that's how it should be. It's not pressed down there very tight. I prefer to do it by hand. I think it's faster, especially if you don't know the socket size. And you can see it's wobbling now, so we should be ready to come off. Make sure we go a little bit further, and then it simply lifts off of there. And now we can see inside of here where the source of it is. You can see it gets really wet in there. And this one was shuddering pretty bad. And then we got to pull this clutch tower out of here, this bearing support tower, very carefully so it doesn't come apart. And that's where the different parts of the clutches actually ride. It's like the throwout bearing. There's 2 separate ones for the dual clutch setup. Next thing we got to do is pull out these shift motors right here. There's one here and there's one over here. As you can see already, this is a quite involved process, and you need to make sure you do each step properly, else you're going to have issues after you're done. And then after that, there's what they call clutch actuators, these fingers that actually depress the clutch. It's kind of like a shift fork on the clutch itself. And there's 2 spring type bolts that hold it down. And there's 2 of the Torx bolts. And then you lift them out of here very carefully. Kind of like that. And you got to keep all this together. You got to keep all this together right here because they're all indexed to each other. They're all a matched set with serial numbers. And it's the same thing for this other one. It's got dual actuators, dual throwout bearings. These are match set also. Inside the actual bell housing here, you can see the center seal usually doesn't leak that much. It's the big one underneath this protective ring right here that leaks, and then it gets all over in here. And then there's 3 bolts that hold this sleeve down. It's like a T30. And that right there is where the whole source of all this Shudder issues come from. And then you just get a pick or something like that to hook into the seal here, kind of like I did right here, and then you can pull it up and out of there without damaging the seal on the bearing right here. And these ones are the black seals. These are the original design seals, so these ones are definitely going to leak. But if they're not leaking now, they're going to leak in the future. Whereas the new ones are brownish color. Here you can see the new seal on the right hand side is a new design, and they changed the color of it to the brown like that. And then you just drop your seal in there and use your seal installer, and that'll set it in there just perfectly flush. And there you can see I installed it all the way around, nice and flush, no damage to it. So these seals should seal it up from here on out. And then for this inner seal right here, there's a special tool for that. We'll grip it from the inside, and then use this forcing screw and it'll pull it up out of there. And then of course these seals change to the brown seal design also. And you can see the inner lip there is a lot more robust. One thing you got to watch out for in this input shaft is check all the way around and make sure pieces of that seal or pieces of that garter spring on the seal are not left down in there. This one looks just fine. At this point we can start cleaning the bell housing out before we start reassembling it. You're not going to get all of this clutch dust out of here. It's really ingrained in the rough surface of the housing, but you can try to get most of it out and definitely get the trans fluid out of there. Clean our support sleeve up, because that's definitely going to have the fluid on it. And then it's got a little locating tang right here. There we go. And then you got the 3 bolts that hold that support sleeve down. You can torque them down. And then of course there's a couple special tools. This protects the seal from the splines. Got your seal. It goes in like this, not like this. Put down there straight. And then you got your forcing tool right here. And once you're past the splines with the seal, you can get rid of those. Put that back on. And this has the perfect height so it'll go flush with the center support here. Get that change in sound and you know you've flushed out all the way around. And before you put your clutch actuators back in here, make sure this one side of the retaining bolts, that one has it too, has that dowel in there. That's a locating dowel. Make sure that's still in there. And then you just simply lay it in there. And then make sure these 2 holes line up. And then you start these 2 bolts first, and then we'll start putting these spring bolts in over here, these big ones. Now before you start tightening any of these bolts down, I just got all those bolts in there loose, everything looks lined up. We're going to make sure the shift motor fully splines with it just by pushing it in. And we're flush right here, so we're going to leave it in there while we tighten these bolts. And when you're tightening down these 2 evenly, you want to make sure that these little lines right here match those lines. Any one of them will do as long as the lines match up so the flats are on that curved part right here of the actual shift fork. And then we just snug them down evenly, and then we're going to torque them last. Okay, they're all torqued down, all 4 bolts on each one of them. And then after that we can pull our shift motor back out and let it dangle. So there's another process we got to do still. That was just for alignment purposes. And then going back together, we got this special grease from Ford. This little tube. And they want you to put a little bit around the splines here and up here. And then a little bit of trans fluid right here. Yeah, real small amount. And then of course you work this grease into the splines. And get up any excess. Work it in the splines. And I put a real small amount of that same grease, that special grease, on the tips here. And then that support tower just slides right onto the sleeve here, support sleeve we took off earlier for the input shaft. And there's a knob in it, a little nub in it, and then this has a locating slot on it, and it just slides in there, only one direction. It should fall right into there. And then on top of that support tower, they have what is called Z washers, and they go right on there. You gotta self-center them, both of them, so that there's no issues with noise in the new clutch. It's gotta sit in there perfectly, and that's why we gotta lock them in while it's upright like this. And then you're supposed to use that press-in tool attached to these lifting ears to put the new clutch in. That makes it a lot more heavy. And what we found is that the straps for the half shafts, you're supposed to get a new one anyways, because they're not reusable. So all you gotta do is they fit perfectly, hold a hole, and you make lifting handles for yourself. And the only thing you gotta know when putting this clutch into there is to make sure these splines spline up with the center support there on the transmission, and it'll drop down, and after that we gotta use that tool to press in this bearing. Okay, one last check of your Z washers. Make sure they don't fall off or are lopsided. Make sure they're perfectly centered. And we could drop the clutch in. There we go. You can see how it dropped down much further there. And now we're halfway up on the actual bearing. And that's how it should look. We're halfway up on the actual bearing, and we just gotta press the other half down. That's how you know you're splined. Okay, now comes the tricky part. You don't want to shake the trans at all. You want to keep it perfectly upright and level so Z washers do not fall off. And then we're going to use this tool again, and we're going to press down on the inner race of the bearing here for the clutch. And bust this thing back out. Center it on here first. And it's a little tight in here, but we're just going to press it down. Should press down real easy. Just until the center support tower comes past and we can get that snap ring on there. Then we're going to continue pressing it until the snap ring pops in. You don't want to go any further. This thing's very sensitive to the depth. And there you can see it, it's sticking out just far enough we can put that snap ring on there and then continue pressing so it falls into its slot just perfect and doesn't go down too far. And there you can see we got the snap ring in, but it's not in the slot yet, and we're just going to press on top of that snap ring and it'll pop in and we're done. Don't go any further down. That can cause a lot of noise issues. Okay, you should be able to see this pop in there. Popping down. You see it just popped in there, went down just a little bit more, and that's it. After that, we're going to put the center support hub back in. It comes with the new clutch. All you got to do is make sure that it lines up with those slots on there. There we go. And you can see the line matches up. And then you got to put your new snap ring in to hold the hub in place. And right here is a little white leg right here sticking out. That needs to be between this end and this end so it doesn't bump that spring out. As you can see, if you put it on there, it'll push the snap ring out. So you need to get it away from there so the snap ring fully seats. And now you can see that leg fully seats in there away from that white piece of nylon sticking out. And then make sure your legs are underneath here and they don't end here where it's an open gap, so they're supported. And then before we even rock this trans or flip it to its side, we need to release the locks on the new clutch by turning this screw counterclockwise 14 times. And we're going to do clutch motor number 1 first, and then number 2. So clutch number 1 is it's on top of the trans, next to the linkage and all that. And of course there's a special tool for that. And you just count, and you'll listen, you'll hear it. 1. And once they're released, you can move on to the next one. And then the same thing over here. After that, a little anti-seize on the shaft here, and then around the outside. And then you bolt your shift motors up, and they should go in just like this. Give them a little wiggle, and they should spline right in. You shouldn't have to suck them to it with bolts. They should go in just like that, no problem, once they're splined up. And then once they're flush all the way, you can start doing bolts. And it's the same thing with the other shift motor. At this point, it's safe to flip the trans around on its side or whatever you got to do. Before you do that, make sure you spin it. Should be no noise. And then find your triangle on here, and that's your alignment mark for balancing to the flywheel. A little triangle right there. And that's going to be hard to see, so we're going to mark the area and the threads so we can see it on the other side of that flex plate. And we'll match that to the dot on the flex plate. So you line this stud with our mark, our balancing mark, and our white paint with whichever hole is closest to the yellow dot on the flex plate, which is the balancing dot on the flex plate. Okay, so I got the transmission back in, and I got the clutch tightened up to the flywheel just right so that there's no engine vibrations. These ones, this is another step that is very picky, and you gotta be precise on these transmissions and fixing them, is you need to tighten the clutch to the flywheel in a very particular order, and it's a 2-step torque sequence on there. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of first order engine vibrations, especially at idle. So that's another thing to watch out for. Your car should not have a bunch of vibration at idle. 4 cylinders with vibration at idle is a thing of the past. You're going to feel it still, but there shouldn't be vibrations abnormally like the old 4 cylinders of yesteryear. So the next step we got to do, and what any good technician will do, even though I've had this in about 2 weeks ago when it initially came in and we ordered parts for it, make sure there's no later calibrations for the PCM, and there isn't. And after that, we need to go into the TCM adaptive learning. That's another very specific thing on this transmission procedure that you have to do, and go through all these learnings of the trans range sensor, the actual shift drum, and the clutch itself finally. And you got to do this, and this is only done with the Ford IDS scan tool. What we're going to do is we're going to go through each position and make sure it's in that position, and then we're going to tell it to learn. Make sure you're in the gear, And this whole process, from this point on, the learning of the shifter position to the drum touch points to the clutch touch points is all very important. And then you go through afterwards and make sure no matter what you do, it goes into the proper reading on there for what position you're in. And that all passes. And then the next thing we need to do is learn the shift drum. Basically make sure it's in park and hold that brake all the way down so it doesn't lose the brake signal and it can complete its calibration. And it makes a lot of noise under the hood as it shifts through and moves the shift motors. And that passed. And now the most important part, we can go in here and we can learn the clutch touch points very accurately with this new tool they have on here. And it'll literally engage the clutch while we're in park. So we're just going to let it go through. It's going to check all those areas. And as you can see, this is these transmissions are very, they're complicated. And they require a lot of attention. You can't just reflash them, reset the memory, and go, and it'll just learn. It's got to do all this special learning with the scan tool. And then here we're going to keep it in park, but we're going to put it at maximum throttle, and then it's going to try to engage the clutch, and it'll sense the touch points at that point and get them calibrated. This is very important. You can really see this is very, very complex procedure, but it's important to get this initial learning done. So when you go out on the road and you drive it, you only have to drive for a couple miles, and then it'll basically be good to go for long-term learning with the customer. So hopefully the place you take it to is going through all this and not just shooting out the door. You can see it takes some time. And these will not always pass the first time. You see how it learns the touch points on there? So it learned them. Okay, so once you let idle for a while, so it learns the idle trims and all that stuff, you can go for a test drive and just be easy in the shifts at first. And then after that, you can try to get on it and see if it performs under good acceleration. But at first, go to an area where you can do slow acceleration, so it can go through each shift point just fine. And then after that, the downshifting also one at a time instead of like a 5 to 1 downshift type deal. So we're gonna go for a test drive, and it's gonna be a little bit of a rough engagement, a little bit of a shudder. It's a brand new clutch. They call it a green clutch. And it's going to have a little bit of that for up to 5,000 miles, Ford says. Basically, by the time I get done with my test drive, 10-minute test drive and everything works fine from start to finish. After that, it's just fine. That's been my experience anyways. So we're going slowly through the shifts, keeping the RPMs under 2,000. And we're just going to let it learn all its shift points. We did the initial learning with the scan tool, and now we're doing the real fine tune, the actual fine touch points. And there it learned a downshift upon a hill when it needed to. It downshifted under acceleration. And it's going to learn all those things as it goes through and we drive. And especially as it warms up too. There's different characteristics for that. The clutch itself, once it's warm also. So it's going to learn from cold on. Because even though we were idling to warm the engine up, we definitely were not warming the clutch up. So we're on the side streets right now, and then we're about to go on the country roads right here. We can get to, 50, 60 miles an hour. Low coast down the hill. This thing runs absolutely great. Actually, it's one of the best ones I've ever experienced as far as an after clutch repair. Alright, now we're going to go to the higher speeds. Yeah. This one's shifting really good. I don't know if that's because I've done so many and it's just becoming a process at this point, and everything's just, all my little tricks and forge tricks have come together, or not, or what, but this one's shifting absolutely beautifully. What I also wonder is if they've actually finalized, not finalized, but they've come to a point where it's acceptable, partially perfected dual clutch setup, and the actual clutches are working absolutely properly now, instead of all the other revisions that they've gone through over the years. There's been 3 or 4 major revisions in part number changes to this clutch. So besides the seal changes that caused the fluid on there, they were still improving the actual clutch itself. So now that all that's done, and we got that, they just came out with a later calibration of software about a month ago. So that all helps also. And just about every time it comes out, it's something to do with the shutter, intermittent shutter, whatever else. So they're perfecting the software, the clutches, and the seals. And then I think the technicians are getting better because they're doing so many of them, just like I've done so many of them. I've got my process down, I've got my tricks down, and they're coming out just fine. Now we'll see. I've never had any comeback for any kind of shutter or harsh shift issues or any kind of leaks on any of the ones I've done from my first one I was learning on to this, the one before this one, which is about 2 months ago. So I've been doing it for, ever since it basically came out, a year or two. I've been really doing heavy duty. So hopefully these new calibrations and clutches are holding up. They definitely are for me. So hopefully this sheds some light on just how complicated this transmission is and how many opportunities there are for the technician to screw up. I mean, if you don't follow directions and follow all Ford service tips and have some kind of experience with these, you're going to mess it up, and you may have new issues upon when you finish the vehicle that you didn't have before. So this is not a repair video by any means. I just wanted to show the process and kind of give you a better idea of just how this transmission works, so you understand it really is a manual transmission, and it's going to have the characteristics of a manual transmission. And I know it sounds like I work for Ford and I'm a PR person, but it really is, this is a better explanation than they could ever do for how this transmission works and what to expect from it. Now, when you get a new clutch done like this guy has, it's going to be green, like I said, for 3,000 to 5,000 miles. It's going to have maybe some different kinds of noises, and it may have some different shutters at different temperatures until it fully breaks in, fully matches up with the actual disc in there.